This is not the video I planned to make today. But sometimes a story comes along you just kind of have to tell. And I do love a tangent. I am here on the Royal Mile in the middle of Edinburgh, and as you can see, it's all about to kick off. All in the name of the King and the honours of Scotland. But why? What are the honours of Scotland? Why were they buried in a graveyard for 9 years? And what about the time they went missing for 111 years? Welcome to Scotland Unplugged and the story of the Scottish Crown Jewels. Today is the 5th of July, and in a short while, King Charles and Queen Camilla. That sounds really weird to say out loud, just because we had the same Queen for so long. King and Queen, even that sounds weird. There's a service happening over there in St Giles Cathedral, during which Charles gets his slightly sausagey fingers on the honours of Scotland. But what are they? The honours consist of a few pretty ostentatious trinkets that normally live in Edinburgh Castle. I've seen them in person, but I actually can't remember, just because there was me, my brother, 2 small sons each, and a lot of queuing. They leave Edinburgh Castle this afternoon under military escort en route to St Giles. It's not that far. This is St Giles Cathedral, with its iconic crown-shaped spire. It has a fair bit of history and was probably founded by David I in 1124. During the Scottish Reformation, this was ground zero, the place where John Knox preached fire and beardy brimstone. The honours are the oldest royal regalia in Britain and were first used together at the coronation of a 9-month-old Mary Queen of Scots in 1543. But this time round there's a new addition, the Elizabeth Sword, commissioned in honour of Queen Elizabeth, obviously. The crown has been in its current form since 1540, when James V had it remodelled, but it's thought to date back much further. It was last worn at the coronation of Charles II at Scone Palace in 1651. Check out my video on the Stone of Destiny if you're curious about Scone Palace. There's also a sceptre made of solid silver and topped with 3 figures supporting a crystal globe with a Scottish pearl on the top. That might have been presented to James IV by Pope Innocent VIII in 1494, but James V had that remodelled too, even adding his own initials. The Sword of State was presented to James IV in 1507 by Pope Julius II. James V managed to avoid remodelling that one. The honours have had quite a journey. When Oliver Cromwell occupied Scotland in the 1650s, he was desperate to get his mitts on them. They were the symbols of Scottish nationhood, so the possession of them means something. Cromwell had had Charles I executed in 1649, and after Charles II had himself crowned at Scone as Cromwell advanced, they couldn't be taken back to Edinburgh Castle. Cromwell had already taken that. They couldn't stay at Scone because he was headed that way as well, so the king had them taken to Dunnottar Castle, but eventually Oliver's army headed that way too, and laid siege to the castle for 8 months. They were held off by around 70 men, but the end result was kind of inevitable. So something had to be done. The crown, sword and sceptre were lowered over the side of the castle to the shore, where a servant, pretending to gather seaweed, scooped them up and took them to a local church. The local minister, the Reverend James Granger, another James just to confuse you, and his wife, wrapped them in linen and buried them. They stayed there for 9 years while Cromwell kept searching. During that time, the minister and his wife dug them up every 3 months under cover of darkness, just to air them and make sure they weren't damaged or rusting. They were returned to Charles in 1660 and then returned to the castle, where they'd come out occasionally to the Scottish Parliament to signify the king's presence. He never actually returned to Scotland. In 1707, following the Act of Union, the Scottish Parliament was dissolved, so they weren't needed. They were locked in the Crown Office in the castle and forgotten about for 111 years until the writer and historian Walter Scott discovered them there in 1818. They were put on display in 1819 and have been ever since. Charles will be presented with the Elizabeth sword because the original is a bit too delicate to handle. The new one is a bit of a beast and was designed by Mark Dennis, costing £22,000 to make. It might be displayed with the originals for a while. Today is all about pomp, pageantry, and for some, protest. There'll be a procession and bling and a 21-gun salute and a flyby by the Red Arrows, which I'm going to go and try and spot from the house while I'm editing this.
I missed it, but Caroline caught it from the park.
See you next time.